It's kind of in two phases. The first thing I want to do is kind of talk about my experience when I became commissioner. And people always ask me, what's one of the biggest surprises you've had? And my response was the amount of time I passed this on with the lawyers at the city of Atlanta. I was really surprised by that, even being a lawyer myself. And I remember my first few days in the job, Paul Taylor was the interim commissioner. Paul has stepped out, so he was going to talk about him. And he showed me around the office. He said, this filing cabinet here with these two drawers, this is really important. And I was like, well, what is it? He goes, well, those are all your MOUs. So I had two filing cabinet drawers full of MOUs. So I just wanted to tell that story a little bit of context. The second story I want to tell you about is about the Friends of Little Nancy Creek Park. For those who don't know, Little Nancy Creek is a new park up in Buckhead where we don't have enough parks. And a group of neighbors got involved. Gordon Certain really kind of got the park created, and then the Friends of Little Nancy Creek got started. They created a community garden, and they're raising money for a playground and doing all this great stuff. And my staff came to me and they said, well, they're doing all this stuff and they're going to create all this maintenance problems for us, and so we need an MOU so that we don't have to maintain it, so the Friends of Little Nancy Creek can maintain it, we don't have to worry about it. And so I was like, okay, that makes sense, let's go ahead and do this. And so we started talking about it, and the Friends of Little Nancy Creek were being very cooperative and trying to figure out what we had with MOU. And finally we had a meeting to talk about it, and I said, well, I'm going to throw you guys a curveball. I don't think we need an MOU. You guys can go and you guys can raise all the money you want, and we can accept it through Park Pride. And you guys, you can do the design, we can coordinate with the design, and we'll approve it, stuff like that. There's no reason for us to have an MOU for you guys to improve your park and make it better. There's no reason for you guys to have an MOU to have a community garden. We have an agreement with Park Pride. You can have your community garden, Park Pride regulates it, there's no reason for an MOU. And so I think they're delighted. It's very easy, they don't need liability insurance, they don't need any of the hassles and stuff like that, because Park Pride makes it very easy for them to get involved and improve their parks. I'll confess to being a little biased toward Park Pride. Another example, Friends of Collier Heights Park. Talked about that for 7 years, pretty much since I got involved here with Park Pride first, and then here with the city. But here's a group in Northwest Atlanta, probably working-class African-American community that went out and raised $300,000 to improve their park. They put in a light trail exercise system, they put in a playground, they put in a snack bar. They did all these great improvements for their park. Again, no MOU. Working with Park Pride, they did all these tremendous improvements to their park. Now, I actually am talking to the Friends of Collier Heights about an MOU now. And the reason I'm doing that is because they want to operate the recreation center. And so suddenly now, if we start talking about operations, and then you say, well, we need insurance if you're kind of in there without us operating that if you're doing some programming and stuff like that, we need that contractual relationship. We need that contractual assurance. And I say that because it seems that we've gotten to a point now where people feel that they want to get involved with their park, that they want to make an improvement and make our city better, make their community better, that they need an MOU with us. And I'm just here to say, you don't. And I don't want it. I spend enough time with the lawyers as it is. I like, when I leave office and I'm like showing the next commissioner around, I'll say, and here's your one filing drawer full of MOUs. You don't have two, and you can thank me for that later on. Let me just, to wrap up again, I mean, if you work with Park Pride, you don't need to get insurance. They can accept donations. They're a sole source contractor with the city, so we can do some contracting stuff with you. We're working on terms of renewal. They're even maintaining parks. Like 90 communities have adopted parks and maintain parks. That means that's 90 parks I don't have to maintain, so I can invest that elsewhere. With the adopted community garden program, they're working with the Beltline, adopted Beltline. It's very good getting this maintenance aspect of it. And even raising money, they're great, they can help you raise money. And I shouldn't say that because I'm not putting them in the line. But the funders believe in Park Pride, they're a known entity. A lot of these groups are trying to become conservancies or Friends Park groups. In all honesty, it's very difficult for the funders to keep up with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 dozen Friends of the Park groups or conservancies. They know who Park Pride is. They have a name. They have a brand. They're trusted, and you can work with them to raise money. And they will invest in your park working through Park Pride. And so I really felt that it was very important for me to kind of stand up here in front of you and encourage you to do that. And if I start saying I don't want an MOU with you, it's nothing personal. The means exist already to do it. So I just want to give that shout out to Park Pride. State of Atlanta's parks. I'm about to enter my first budget. I have my first budget meeting with finance tomorrow, so I'm learning how that works. And we find ourselves in a familiar position. It's a position I think a lot of municipalities find themselves in, that we're seeing reduced revenues, and it's always a difficult budget situation. And the state of Atlanta, if you guys have been following the news, it's made worse by some of the pension liabilities that we face as a city. The state of Atlanta's pension liability currently is unfunded pension liability is $1.5 billion. If we don't do anything in about 20 years, it's going to be $4.5 billion. And fortunately, Mayor Reed has really shown some leadership behind finding some solutions. He put through a couple solutions last week asking people to fund it. So what does it mean for parks and green space? I meet with staff of Office of Parks, Office of Recreation, Park Design, Culture Affairs once a quarter, and we talk about issues. And we met with Parks last week, and of course pensions was a really big issue because the employees were really concerned about it. The head of the union, AFSCME, stood up and said it better than I could. She said she just met with the chief operating officer, and really what we're talking about is if we don't have pension reform, we have to cut about 180 jobs from the city of Atlanta. Okay? 180 jobs from the city of Atlanta. And we have 7,000 people saying, oh, 180 jobs out of 7,000, it's not that bad. Except you think, well, airport, actually, the airport is funded, it's enterprise fund, it's not part of the general fund, so none of those 180 jobs are coming from the airport. And watershed, the same thing. They aren't coming from the watershed. They aren't going to come from police. They aren't going to come from fire. They're going to come from corrections. You start, crossing out those departments, and suddenly, 3,000, 4,000 people are off the table. They're going to get cut, and they're going to start looking for departments like ours. So, that's as we go through this finance, as we go through the budget process. That's a big issue. Pensions are going to impact how much money we have for parks. And it's not a new thing. It was true last year. It was true the year before. It'll be true next year if we don't solve it. Last year we spent $110 million just paying interest on our pension obligations. We didn't even drop down that $1.5 million. We just honored our obligations. So when you hear pension reform, it affects us. It affects everyone in this room. It affects the services you get. As Mayor Reed frequently says, Atlanta's greatness is tied up in its pensions. And we need to find a way to solve that. And so I encourage each of you guys to kind of get involved. Pay attention to this. It's impacting you. And it's impacting me. And I'm going to be sitting in front of City Council pretty much saying the same thing. In terms of the state of the department, I will say I inherited a department in pretty good shape. I think Diane Harnell-Cohen, who was here earlier, did an excellent job in terms of increasing capacity and really making the Parks Department a better functioning, excellent department. If you look at and compare the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Culture Affairs to other departments in the city of Atlanta, we really are top tier. And she deserves a whole heck of a lot of thanks for that, a lot of gratitude. Now, I always feel we can get better, but I do want to acknowledge that I was fortunate to have her come before me and really improve the Parks Department. I also want to acknowledge Ken Gillette. Ken's still here to take off. Okay. Well, Ken was our former director of parks, did an excellent job. We have a new person, Doug Voss. Is Doug still here? There Doug is. Doug, will you stand up? I'm really excited to have Doug on our team. Doug came to us from Miamisburg, Ohio. He was a Louisville beforehand, Georgia native, family in Macon, and he really knows his stuff. And he's really organized, and he's structured, and he likes systems, and that really appeals to me. I'm a bit of a geek when you start talking about strategic planning and systems and accountability and stuff like that. But you're going to see the difference in your parks. And I'm just really wanted to acknowledge Doug and his whole team. I mean, actually, why don't we have everybody DPR say, why don't you please guys stand up? All around the room. It really is a good department, and we get together every day. And the last thing I want to talk about, and then I can answer a few questions. I know I'm standing between you guys and Grace. Is, every cabinet we go, we make presentations to the mayor and the rest of the cabinet members on various subjects. And I was asked to do a presentation about Green Team. The Green Team is departmental representatives who work together to try to expand parkland for the city. And I've historically said we're 25th out of 25. I found out that recently we passed Miami, so we're 24th out of 25 in terms of the percent of our land dedicated to parks. And so I made this presentation to the mayor and cabinet, went through real quickly. Well, here we are, we're 24th out of 25th. I can go on the next slide, and the mayor goes, whoa, 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 stop, go back. And he looks at it, we have our bar graph. I guess I should have used this as my one visual. And he stares at it for a while and goes, we're behind Detroit. and we're behind Cleveland. And he basically said, he tasked me and Brian Leary, the executive director of Atlanta Beltline, he said, I want you guys to come back, I want you to find a way to fix this. He said, now I know we're not going to go to number 1 or number 2, but it's just not acceptable that we're 24th out of 25 cities. And so Brian and I got together and worked at it, and we came up with a plan, and it's a plan that's still a work in progress, but I just want to share it with you guys here today, to pretty much double the park acreage in the city of Atlanta, and make it so that we have a park within a half-mile walking distance of every resident in the city of Atlanta. And it sounds kind of huge, but actually, it's more doable than you think. The city of Atlanta has about 3,700 acres of parkland currently. So to double, we need to add another 3,700 acres of parkland. So how do we do that? Well, the Beltline is going to add 1,250 acres, so that's a third of it right there. Okay, that's excellent. So that'll move us, I think, up to 21st out of 25th. We're making progress. But you also look at public lands. Right now, like the Department of Watershed Management, I was working with Susan Rutherford, who's been very helpful with this. She identified like 540 acres of watershed land that's accessible and really is treated like parkland. We have a couple of examples. Herbert Green Nature Preserve, I see Mrs. Leith out here, where a lot of that is parkland, but a lot of it's watershed land. Beecher Hampton, is Bruce Morton still here? You know, there's another example where basically it's parkland abutting watershed land, and we aren't counting that. So when Peter's doing his wonderful assessment of where Atlanta stands, you know, it's basically parkland. We aren't counting it. So we want to look at that. We're looking at landfills. We're looking at Fort McPherson, 150 acres. And we can cobble together, you know, another 1,300 acres that way. So that gets us 2/3 the way we need to be. And it really, I mean, it's doable. The Atlanta Beltline's happening. We own probably a third of the land we need to get to. And so it gets us that delta of another, you know, 1,200 to 1,300 acres of land that we need to acquire. And as we acquire that, that's where we also need to address the issue of accessibility, where we acquire property that is within a half-mile walking distance. So we can map out the land we currently have, add the Beltline, add the existing parkland, and then we can see the gaps and we can try to acquire land. That's going to be expensive, and we haven't quite figured out how to do it. And we are going to be figuring it out in the next few months, and so I'm going to probably need your help. It was great hearing this panel discussion. If the state passes that and we have a dedicated funding source to help us do it, that'd be great. But we're going to try to cobble together the financial way of doing it. And that, in a nutshell, is the state of Atlanta's parks.